The wind carved through the Alaskan wilderness with a sound like broken glass, and Frank Mercer stood at the edge of nothing, holding a letter he would never send. His hands, roughened by 60 years of gripping camera lenses in impossible weather, trembled as he folded the paper for the 7th time that morning. The words written there were simple, apologetic, final. He had been alone in the research station for 15 days, and the silence had grown teeth. The cabin behind him was dark, despite the midday sun. Frank had stopped opening the curtains 3 days ago, stopped washing dishes 2 days before that. The routines that had held him together for the first week after the avalanche had crumbled like the mountain itself, leaving nothing but empty hours and the growing realization that no one was coming. No one even knew he needed help. The satellite radio lay in pieces on the workbench, its antenna sheared off by flying ice, its circuits fried beyond any repair his amateur skills could manage. Frank looked down at the letter in his hands. Emma's name was written on the envelope in his careful block letters. His daughter, 28 years old now, married to a man named Derek, who worked in software, mother to 2 children Frank had met exactly twice. Once at the wedding, once when the oldest was born. He had sent cards for birthdays and holidays, called on Christmas, maintained the minimal contact that let them both pretend they had a relationship. But they did not. Not really. Frank had spent Emma's childhood on assignment in distant places, chasing the perfect shot, building a career that won awards and paid well, and left no time for the actual business of being a father. Margaret had understood. She had always understood. That was her gift, that infinite patience, that ability to love him despite his absences. She had raised Emma while Frank photographed grizzlies in Kamchatka and jaguars in the Amazon and wolves in Yellowstone. She had never complained, never made him choose, never asked him to be something he was not. And then, 2 years ago, she had gone to the doctor for a persistent cough and come home with a diagnosis that gave her 6 months. She lasted 5. Frank had been there for those 5 months. He had cancelled contracts, put his career on hold, sat by her bedside, and held her hand. He had done everything right finally, when it was too late for it to matter. Margaret died in their bedroom in Montana on a Tuesday morning in March. The windows open to let in the spring air she loved. Her last words to him were, "Keep taking beautiful pictures, keep showing people the world." But Frank had not taken a single photo after her funeral. He could not. Every time he looked through a viewfinder, he saw her absence. Every landscape was incomplete without her to share it with. Every animal was just another creature moving through a world that had taken the only person who mattered and left him with nothing but the shape of her absence. The Snow Leopard project had been a lifeline thrown by an editor who knew him well enough to understand he needed to disappear. 6 weeks in the Alaskan wilderness, minimal human contact, just Frank and his cameras and animals that did not care about his grief. It should have been perfect. Instead, it had become a slow-motion collapse, and now, sealed into this remote valley by an avalanche that had destroyed every route out, Frank had run out of reasons to pretend he wanted to survive. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he almost convinced himself it was the wind playing tricks. A cry. Weak, desperate, impossible. Something alive was dying in the snow, and Frank Mercer, who had stopped caring whether he himself lived or died, found his boots moving before his broken mind could object. Before we continue this story, we want to invite you to subscribe to Wild Heart Stories. Every subscription helps us share more incredible true stories about the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. By joining our community, you are helping us celebrate the connections that remind us what it means to truly care for another living being. Please subscribe and be part of something beautiful. Frank had arrived at the research station 6 weeks earlier on a grey October morning, flying in by bush plane with a pilot who talked too much about weather patterns and not enough about where to set down without killing them both. The station was more isolated than Frank had imagined, which was saying something for a man who had spent his career in remote places. It sat in a narrow valley, surrounded by peaks that scraped the sky, accessible only by a single dirt road that wound through mountain passes for 60 miles before connecting to anything resembling civilization. The nearest town was a collection of 12 buildings that called itself a village. The nearest hospital was 200 miles south in Anchorage. The station itself was utilitarian, a main cabin with 2 rooms, a wood stove, a generator, and a satellite radio that connected him to the project coordinator once a week. A storage shed held supplies, equipment, and frozen food that would last through winter if rationed properly. Solar panels on the roof provided minimal power. A well provided water. Everything was designed for function, not comfort, which suited Frank perfectly. He had not come here for comfort. The Snow Leopard project was the kind of ambitious, probably doomed conservation effort that made good press and questionable science. 3 years earlier, a team of researchers had imported 5 snow leopards from shrinking habitats in Mongolia and Kazakhstan, betting that the animals could adapt to this corner of Alaska. The logic was sound on paper. Similar terrain, similar climate, similar prey species. If it worked, it would prove that climate refugees could be relocated successfully, opening possibilities for other endangered species being squeezed out of their traditional ranges by warming temperatures. But theory rarely survived contact with reality. 2 of the 5 leopards had died within the first year, unable to adapt to the new territory. 1 had been struck by a logging truck on the access road. 1 had simply vanished, probably killed by the resident wolf pack or the grizzly bears that owned these mountains. Only 1 female had survived, designated Subject 7 in the research logs, a tough, intelligent animal that had learned to hunt the local prey and establish a territory in the high country above the tree line. Then Subject 7 had done something miraculous. She had produced a cub, the first snow leopard born in North America in any context other than a zoo. The project team had been ecstatic, writing papers about successful adaptation and genetic viability. Funding agencies had been less impressed. The price tag for monitoring 5 leopards, 4 of which died, was astronomical. The cost-benefit analysis did not support continued investment. The decision had been made to end the project, recapture Subject 7 and her cub, and relocate them to a breeding program in California. That was when Frank had been hired. Document the recapture. Photograph the animals before they left. Provide images for the final report that would declare the project a noble failure. 6 weeks of work, good money, and a place where no one would bother him with questions about how he was doing, or suggestions about grief counseling, or invitations to dinner that would require him to pretend he was a person who could still function in society. The avalanche had come on day 8, and everything had changed. Frank had been outside securing camera equipment when the mountain fractured. The sound was like nothing he had ever heard. A crack so deep it seemed to come from the bones of the earth itself. He looked up in time to see half a ridge collapse, millions of tons of snow and rock sliding down in a white wall that consumed everything in its path. The bridge, spanning the gorge between his valley and the main road, vanished in seconds, crushed under debris. The primary hiking trail to the ranger station disappeared under 30 feet of compressed snow and shattered trees. The emergency route through the northern pass, the one marked on every map as the backup exit, ceased to exist under a flow of ice and stone that remade the entire landscape. The satellite radio antenna on the cabin roof, his only link to the outside world, was sheared off by a chunk of ice the size of a refrigerator. Frank watched it tumble down the slope like a broken toy and understood immediately what that meant. No communication, no way to call for help, no way to let anyone know he was trapped. He stood in the settling snow dust, his ears ringing from the roar of the avalanche, and took inventory. The cabin was intact, the supplies were secure. He had food for 4 months if he was careful, longer if he rationed severely. He had firewood for the stove, batteries for the cameras, books to read, and the technical manuals for the radio that might possibly help him repair the damage if he was very lucky. He should have felt panic. He should have felt fear, or anger, or desperation. Instead, Frank felt a strange, hollow calm settle over him, like the snow settling over the valley. The decision had been made for him. The universe had provided an ending that would look like an accident, a tragedy of bad timing and worse luck. No one would question it. No one would blame him. Emma would grieve, but she would have the insurance money and the knowledge that her father had died doing what he loved, documenting wild animals in wild places. It was almost perfect. The first week after the avalanche, Frank maintained routines because he did not know what else to do. He woke with the sun, made coffee on the wood stove, ate oatmeal from the bulk supplies. He checked the weather station, recorded temperatures and wind speeds, maintained the logs that the project coordinator would never read. He charged camera batteries. He reviewed footage of the snow leopards he had captured before the disaster, watching Subject 7 move through the landscape like a pale ghost, all power and grace and wild intelligence. But the routines were performative, muscle memory from a version of himself that had died with Margaret. By the second week, Frank stopped pretending. He let the fire burn too low, waking in the morning to a cabin cold enough to see his breath. He forgot to eat for entire days, then consumed entire cans of soup in single sittings, tasting nothing. He stopped recording data, stopped checking equipment, stopped doing anything that required a reason to care about tomorrow. He spent hours staring out the window at the mountains, watching the light change as the sun traced its low winter arc across the southern sky. The peaks were beautiful in their indifference, massive and ancient and utterly unconcerned with human suffering. Frank envied them. He wanted to be stone, to feel nothing, to exist without the weight of memory and regret and the crushing knowledge that he had spent his whole life looking through camera lenses at the world instead of actually living in it. On day 15, he wrote the letter. It took him 3 hours to compose 4 paragraphs. He had written thousands of captions in his career, had described complex animal behaviors in precise technical language for journal articles, but trying to explain to his daughter why he was giving up proved almost impossible. The words felt inadequate, clumsy, insufficient, but he wrote them anyway because she deserved something. She deserved an explanation, even if it was a poor one. He told her he was sorry. Sorry for being absent during her childhood, sorry for prioritizing his career over her soccer games and school plays, sorry for becoming a stranger who sent cards and made awkward phone calls twice a year. He told her he loved her, which was true, but also insufficient. He told her about Margaret, about how losing her had broken something fundamental in him, something he did not know how to repair. He told her the cabin had all his important documents, that his lawyer had instructions, that the insurance would cover expenses and leave her comfortable. He did not tell her he was choosing this. He did not explain the emptiness that had consumed him, or the letter's real purpose. He wrote it as if he expected to die naturally, alone in the wilderness. Another tragic accident. Let her believe that. Let her think he had tried to survive and simply failed. That was kinder than the truth. Frank sealed the letter in a waterproof plastic bag, placed it on the table beside his wedding ring and a photograph of Margaret taken 30 years earlier in Yellowstone, back when they were young and in love, and believed the future was infinite. Then he put on his expedition parka, the heavy one rated for 40 below, and stepped out into the cold. The temperature had dropped to 20 below zero. The wind was vicious, cutting through even the best gear, turning exposed skin numb within seconds. Perfect, Frank thought distantly. This would not take long. He was not sure what he intended to do. Walk until he could not walk anymore, perhaps. Lie down in the snow somewhere far from the cabin and let the cold make the decision for him. It would be peaceful, supposedly. Hypothermia. You got confused first, then sleepy, then you simply did not wake up. Emma would never know it was a choice. The rangers who eventually found him would write it up as an accident, a man who went out to check equipment and got disoriented in the cold. Clean, simple, tragic but unremarkable. But habits die hard, and his boots carried him toward the trail camera out of pure muscle memory. It was mounted on a tree near the frozen stream, a quarter-mile from the cabin, positioned to catch the snow leopards when they came down from the high country to hunt. Frank had checked it weekly since his arrival, downloading footage, replacing batteries, maintaining the equipment, because that was what the job required. He did not care about the job anymore. He did not care about the footage or the project or anything beyond the next hour. But his feet knew the trail, and his hands knew the routine, and so he found himself standing in the brutal cold, downloading data from a camera with fingers numb even through insulated gloves. That was when he heard it. The cry, high-pitched, desperate, weakening with each repetition. Frank looked up from the camera screen, confused. The sound came again, carried on the wind. Not an imaginary sound, not wind or ice or his own wishful thinking, something alive, something dying. His boots moved before his mind caught up, carrying him off the trail toward the source of the sound. He pushed through drifts of fresh snow, climbed over a fallen log, and found them 30 feet from the path. The female snow leopard was massive, easily 90 pounds of pure muscle wrapped in fur, so pale it seemed to glow against the snow. She was beautiful, even in death, her coat marked with perfect rosettes, her face frozen in a final snarl that spoke of courage and fury, and a fight she had never had a chance of winning. Deep claw marks scored her shoulders and flank. A grizzly, Frank understood immediately. The bears should have been deep in hibernation by now, but the unseasonable warmth before the avalanche had confused their patterns, keeping some awake and hunting far later than normal. Subject 7. The miracle survivor. The female who had defied the odds and adapted and produced the first cub, dead in the snow because a sleepy grizzly had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and she had fought to protect something more important than her own life. The cub was pressed against her belly, half buried in her fur, tucked as close to her body as physics would allow. It was tiny, no more than 8 weeks old, all oversized paws and soft baby fur and eyes like chips of blue-gray ice. It was shaking so violently its whole body vibrated, and Frank could see that it was already too cold, already shutting down, already crossing the line between life and death. Without its mother's warmth, the cub would be dead within the hour, maybe less. The temperature was still dropping and night was coming, and the small body had no reserves left to fight the cold. Frank stood there, looking at the dying creature, and thought about the letter on his table. He thought about how easy it would be to keep walking, to let nature take its course, to add one more death to a world already overflowing with them. The Leopard project was over anyway. This cub was already dead, technically, just taking a little while to finish the process. Walking away would be logical, merciful even, quick and clean. The cub cried again, a sound so small and broken and lost that it seemed to tear itself from some deep, forgotten part of Frank's own chest. Those enormous eyes opened, focused on him with desperate intensity. And Frank felt something shift, not a decision, not even a choice, just movement, his hands reaching down before his brain could object, his body overriding the part of his mind that had given up. He knelt in the snow and carefully peeled the cub away from its mother's stiffening body. The small animal was limp, barely responsive, its soft fur matted with ice crystals. Frank pulled open his parka with clumsy, numb fingers, then unzipped his inner fleece layer, then pulled up his thermal shirt, pressing the cub directly against his bare skin. The cold of the small body was shocking, like holding a piece of winter itself. Frank gasped, bit back a curse, and zipped everything closed again, creating a cocoon of warmth with his own body heat. The cub stirred weakly against his chest. Frank felt its tiny heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird, fast and desperate and somehow still fighting. He began walking back toward the cabin, one hand pressed against the outside of his coat where the cub rested against his heart. He was not thinking about saving it. That seemed impossible, presumptuous, beyond his capability. He was only thinking about not letting it suffer. That was all. A small mercy in a merciless world. He could do that much. He could make sure this small creature did not die alone and terrified in the cold. The walk back took 15 minutes but felt like hours. The wind fought him every step, trying to push him off the trail, and the cub remained terrifyingly still against his chest. Frank found himself talking to it in a low, steady voice, saying things that made no sense. Words tumbling out of some place he thought had gone silent 2 years ago. Hang on. Just hang on. Almost there. I have got you. You are okay. Almost there. They were Margaret's words, the things she used to say to him during his worst moments, when anxiety about a dangerous shoot or grief over a failed assignment threatened to drown him. Her voice, her cadence, her particular way of making promises she could not possibly keep, but somehow always seemed to fulfill anyway. Inside the cabin, Frank laid the cub on the couch near the stove and immediately began building up the fire, feeding it until the room temperature climbed from barely tolerable to almost oppressive. The small animal remained limp on the cushions, eyes closed, breathing so shallow Frank had to lean close to confirm it was breathing at all. He grabbed every towel he could find and began rubbing the cub's fur, trying to stimulate circulation, trying to warm the small body from the outside while the fire worked on the air around them. He had no idea if this was the right approach. He was a photographer, not a veterinarian. He had documented countless animals but never tried to save one, never needed to understand the actual mechanics of keeping something alive. But his hands kept moving and his voice kept talking, and somewhere in the mechanical repetition of the actions, something shifted. The cub's eyes opened. They were enormous, pale blue, already fading toward the gray that would mark them as adults, and they fixed on Frank's face with an intensity that felt almost human. The small mouth opened, and a sound came out. Not a cry this time. Something else. A chirp, almost. Questioning, confused, looking for something familiar in an unfamiliar world. Frank felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 2 years. It was not hope exactly. It was something more primal than that. A response to need, a recognition of desperate dependence. This small creature needed him, completely and without reservation, in a way nothing else had needed him since Margaret died. He spent the next hour in frantic, improvised care. He melted snow for water, heated it to body temperature, and used a clean cloth to let the cub suckle tiny amounts of liquid. The animal was weak but determined, that small pink tongue working against the fabric, drinking in desperate little gulps. Frank had emergency rations of powdered milk in the supply shed. He mixed a weak solution, according to instructions on the package meant for human babies, tested the temperature on his wrist the way Margaret used to do with bottles for Emma, and offered it to the cub. The small creature drank eagerly, its oversized paws kneading against Frank's forearm in a primal nursing rhythm, and Frank felt tears streaming down his face. He was not sure why he was crying. Relief, maybe, or grief, or the simple, overwhelming weight of responsibility settling onto shoulders that had forgotten how to carry anything beyond his own pain. By midnight, The cub was curled in a nest of blankets on Frank's lap, breathing steadily, radiating heat like a small furnace now that its body temperature had stabilized. Frank sat in the chair by the fire, one hand resting on the impossibly soft fur, feeling the rise and fall of those tiny ribs, counting breaths like prayers. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls with renewed fury, and the temperature continued its plunge toward 30 below. Inside, in the circle of firelight, two creatures who should not have survived the day were somehow still breathing, their hearts beating in rhythm that felt like defiance against the cold dark pressing in from all sides. Frank looked across the room at the table where the letter waited in its plastic bag next to the wedding ring and the photograph. He thought about Emma, about the grandchildren he barely knew, about the life he had abandoned in favor of this self-imposed exile. He thought about Margaret, about how she had always seen the best in him, even when he could not see it in himself. He thought about Subject 7 dead in the snow, about the choice she had made to fight until her last breath for the small life she carried. The cub stirred in his lap, stretched with a tiny yawn that showed needle-sharp baby teeth, and looked up at Frank with those impossible eyes. It made the chirping sound again, softer now, content, and Frank realized he was still crying. Not the silent, empty tears that had leaked from him for 2 years. Real crying, the kind that came from somewhere deep and painful and somehow inexplicably hopeful. He picked up the cub with both hands, held it against his chest the way he had carried it through the snow, and felt the small heart beating against his own. The animal sighed and went completely limp with trust, tucking its small face into the curve of Frank's neck, breath warm against his skin. Frank Mercer, who had come to the Alaskan wilderness to disappear, who had written a letter explaining why he could not continue, who had walked out into the killing cold expecting to never come back, sat in a cabin with a creature that should not exist in this place and understood with sudden, terrifying clarity that he was going to try. He was going to try to keep this small life alive. He was going to try to keep his own life going. He did not know how. He did not know if it was possible. But the letter on the table suddenly felt like something from another life, written by a different man, a stranger whose pain Frank remembered but could no longer quite access. He looked down at the sleeping cub, at the pale fur already drying into soft fluff, at the tiny paws twitching in dreams, at the complete and utter trust radiating from every line of that small body. Frank whispered, "Okay. Okay, little ghost. We will try." Outside, the storm intensified, sealing them into a world of white silence and brutal cold. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, shadows dancing across walls, and two hearts that had stopped believing in tomorrow began, against all logic and experience, to believe again. Not in anything as grand as hope or purpose or healing, just in the next breath, the next moment, the next small act of keeping something precious and fragile alive in a world that specialized in taking such things away. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The cub survived the first night and then the second, and by the third morning, Frank stopped thinking in terms of hours and started thinking in days. By the end of the first week, he was thinking in weeks. The shift happened so gradually, he did not notice it, until he realized he was planning meals 2 days in advance, calculating how to stretch the powdered milk supply, researching in the project manuals how fast snow leopard cubs typically grew and what that would mean for their food requirements. He was making plans. He was thinking about the future. For the first time in 2 years, Frank Mercer was looking forward instead of back. Ghost. The name came to Frank on day 4, watching the pale creature move through the cabin like a wisp of smoke, silent and otherworldly, despite the clumsy, oversized paws that made every step look like a small adventure in balance. Snow leopards were called the ghosts of the mountains in their native ranges, spirits that vanished into rock and snow and left nothing but tracks to prove they had ever been there. But this one was a ghost in another sense too. the last remnant of a failed experiment. The final survivor of a program that had tried to rewrite the rules of nature and lost. The only evidence that Subject 7 had ever existed. Frank spoke the name out loud one morning while the cub was sprawled across his lap, and Ghost's ears swiveled toward him at the sound, those blue-grey eyes focusing with laser intensity. From that moment on, Ghost knew his name, would chirp in response when Frank called, would come padding across the cabin floor whenever he heard that particular combination of sounds. The routines formed out of necessity. Ghost needed food every 4 hours initially, tiny amounts of milk formula that Frank mixed with melted snow and warmed over the stove. The cub needed cleaning, gentle stimulation with a warm cloth to help eliminate waste the way a mother would have done with her tongue. Ghost needed constant warmth, constant contact, constant reassurance that he was safe and protected and cared for. The tasks were endless and exhausting, and they were the only things that kept Frank's mind from spiraling back into the dark place it had occupied before. He could not afford to sink into depression when Ghost cried for food at 2 in the morning. He could not afford to skip meals when the cub needed his body heat to survive. He could not afford to give up when those enormous eyes looked at him with such complete, devastating trust. Frank raided the research station's supplies and found detailed care guides for the leopards, written in optimistic language by scientists who had believed this project would succeed. The guides told him that cubs needed to stay between 85 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit in their first month, that they should gain approximately ½ a pound per week, that their eyes would finish changing from blue to adult coloration between 8 and 12 weeks, that they would start showing interest in solid food around 10 weeks but should not be fully weaned until 16 to 18 weeks. Frank read the guides by firelight while Ghost slept in his lap, that small body rising and falling with breath, and he felt a strange kinship with those unknown scientists. They had believed in impossible things. They had looked at animals being squeezed out of their ancestral ranges by climate change and human expansion, and had said, "We can give them a new home. We can make this work." It had not worked. 4 dead leopards and a cancelled program proved that. But they had tried, and for a brief moment, they had succeeded enough to produce this small, perfect creature currently drooling on Frank's flannel shirt. He started keeping a journal, not the official project logs, but something personal. He wrote about Ghost's small victories. The first time the cub stood on shaky legs and made it 3 whole steps before tumbling over. The first time Ghost figured out how to climb onto the couch without help. The first successful attempt at using the litter box Frank had improvised from a plastic storage container and sand from the shed. The first time Ghost purred, a sound like distant thunder that Frank felt in his own chest and made him smile despite everything. He photographed Ghost constantly, not for the project, for himself. His professional eye captured the way light fell across pale fur, the curiosity burning in those developing eyes, the 100 small moments that made up a life. Ghost playing with a crumpled piece of paper, Ghost investigating a spider in the corner, Ghost sound asleep with one paw over his face. Ghost stretched across Frank's chest in the chair, both of them dozing by the fire. Frank looked at those images on his camera's screen late at night and saw something he had not seen in his work for years. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Not the technical perfection he had always chased. Not the award-winning composition or the rare behavior captured in perfect light. Just life, honest and messy and beautiful. By week 2, Ghost was strong enough to explore properly. The cub investigated every corner of the cabin with intense focus, sniffing chair legs and batting at Frank's bootlaces and attempting to climb onto the table. Everything was fascinating. Everything required investigation. A dust bunny under the couch became a mortal enemy to be hunted and destroyed. The shadows cast by the fire became prey to be stalked and pounced on. Frank's fingers wiggling under a blanket became the most exciting thing that had ever happened in the history of the universe. Frank found himself laughing. Real laughter, not the polite social sounds he had made for 2 years, but genuine belly-deep laughter at Ghost's antics. The cub had no dignity whatsoever, would get so excited about pouncing on a toy that he would overshoot and crash into furniture, would try to look fierce and intimidating, but just looked adorable with his oversized ears and fluffy baby fur. Ghost slept on Frank's chest every night, sprawled across him like a living blanket, purring so loudly it vibrated through Frank's ribcage and made it hard to fall asleep until he got used to the sound. During the day, the cub followed him everywhere. When Frank went to the storage shed to gather firewood, Ghost waited by the door, crying until Frank returned. When Frank cooked meals, Ghost sat at his feet, watching every movement with absolute attention. When Frank tried to use the bathroom alone, Ghost scratched at the door and complained until allowed inside. The animal's entire world had collapsed to a single point of focus, and that point was Frank. It should have felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like being needed in a way that was simple and pure and free of all the complicated guilt and regret that had defined his relationship with Emma. Ghost did not care that Frank had been an absent father. Ghost did not know about missed recitals or forgotten birthdays, or the distance that had grown between father and daughter like a glacier, slow and cold and seemingly permanent. Ghost only cared that Frank was there right now, warm and safe, and providing food and comfort and love. The responsibility terrified him. Frank was keeping this creature alive through sheer stubborn effort and borrowed knowledge, but he had no idea if he was doing it right. Every sneeze from Ghost sent him into panic, checking the care guides, taking the cub's temperature with a rectal thermometer that Ghost absolutely hated. Every moment of unusual stillness made him check for breathing, for alertness, for signs of the 100 things that could go wrong with an orphaned animal. He talked to Ghost constantly, explaining what he was doing, narrating the day, sharing thoughts he would never have voiced to another human. He told Ghost about Margaret, about how she had made him laugh, even during his darkest moods, about how she had believed in his photography when he thought it was a waste of time and he should get a real job. He told Ghost about Emma, about the distance between them that felt unbridgeable, about the guilt of being a father who had always been better at capturing images of the world than actually living in it. He told Ghost about the letter on the table, still in its plastic bag, still waiting. He had not torn it up. He had not thrown it away. It existed as evidence of where he had been, what he had been thinking, how close he had come to a different ending. Ghost listened with those intense, knowing eyes, and Frank convinced himself the animal understood. Maybe not the words, but the tone, the emotion, the grief being slowly, painfully transformed into something else, something that felt like purpose, however temporary and fragile. By week 3, Ghost had grown noticeably. The oversized paws made more sense now that the body was catching up. The baby blue eyes had started shifting toward the distinctive gray-blue of adults. The purr had deepened from a kitten's buzz to something closer to a small motor. Ghost could run without tumbling over, could jump onto the couch in a single bound, could wrestle with a rope toy with genuine ferocity that hinted at the predator he would become. The cabin became a shared territory. Ghost had favorite spots. The rug in front of the fire for afternoon naps, the windowsill for watching birds that came to investigate the cabin, the space under Frank's chair for hiding when the wind made frightening sounds against the walls. Frank adjusted his life around these preferences without thinking about it, the way he had once adjusted around Margaret's routines, her preferred side of the bed, her morning coffee ritual, the way she liked the house quiet in the early morning but filled with music after dinner. He began sleeping in the bed again instead of the chair, and Ghost slept beside him, curled against his side or sprawled across his legs, radiating warmth and making it impossible to move without disturbing him. Frank found he did not mind. The weight and warmth of another living creature sharing his space felt like an anchor, proof that he was not completely alone in this isolated valley, sealed off from the rest of the world. Some nights Frank woke to find Ghost watching him with unblinking attention, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, as if the cub was checking to make sure he was still there, still breathing, still present. On those nights, Frank would reach out and scratch behind Ghost's ears, feeling the immediate response of purring like an engine starting up, and they would both drift back to sleep, connected by something Frank did not have words for, but recognized bone deep as essential. The weather began to shift as February crept closer. The brutal cold eased slightly, though it still rarely climbed above zero during the day. The sun stayed above the horizon a few minutes longer each afternoon, the winter darkness releasing its grip by barely perceptible increments. Frank noticed these changes with a growing sense of unease that he tried to push away. Spring would come eventually. The avalanche debris would melt. People would come looking for him, asking questions, making decisions about what happened next. But that was months away. For now, there was only the cabin and the fire and Ghost growing stronger every day. By week 4, Ghost needed more than the cabin. The cub had too much energy to be contained in 2 rooms, was starting to show signs of restlessness, pacing and climbing and launching himself off furniture in ways that would eventually lead to broken lamps or worse. Frank started taking him outside for short expeditions, keeping Ghost close, watching for signs of cold or exhaustion. Ghost's reaction to the snow was pure joy. The cub exploded out the door the first time, leaped into a drift, and disappeared completely for a terrifying second before erupting out in a shower of white powder, eyes huge with delight. Ghost bounded and rolled and pounced on nothing, tried to catch snowflakes on his tongue, attempted to climb a pine tree, and made it 3 feet before sliding back down with a look of utter betrayal. Frank watched through his camera lens and felt something he had not experienced in years: pride. The uncomplicated, fierce pride of watching something you care about discover its own strength and joy. He took hundreds of photos, Ghost mid-leap, suspended in the air. Ghost with snow on his face, looking absolutely disgusted. Ghost sitting on a rock, trying to look regal, but mostly looking like a fluffy baby with ideas above his station. The outdoor time became part of their daily routine. Morning expedition after breakfast, lasting 10 to 15 minutes depending on temperature. Afternoon adventure before dinner, slightly longer as Ghost built up endurance. Ghost was learning the territory, marking certain trees and rocks as his own, establishing the patterns that would later become instinct. The hunting lessons began accidentally. Frank was outside splitting firewood when a snowshoe hare burst from cover nearby, white on white, nearly invisible until it moved. Ghost's entire body went rigid, every muscle tensed, eyes locked on the fleeing animal with laser focus. The cub's haunches lowered, tail twitching, body coiling like a spring. Then Ghost launched forward in a clumsy but determined chase, legs pumping, snow flying, completely focused on the prey. The hare vanished into the brush within seconds, and Ghost returned to Frank looking puzzled and slightly offended that the food had dared to run away. Frank laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh in 2 years, spontaneous and joyful and completely unexpected. Ghost chirped at him, demanding an explanation for why the universe was so unfair. After that, Frank began actively teaching. He used the frozen rabbit carcasses from the storage shed, meant for the adult leopards they had expected to recapture. He dragged them through the snow on strings, letting Ghost practice stalking and pouncing. The cub was a quick learner, instincts honed by thousands of generations showing through despite the artificial circumstances. Within days, Ghost understood the concept of hunting. Crouch low, move slowly, wait for the right moment, strike fast. Ghost could track movement through snow, could judge distances for jumping, could strike with surprising accuracy for something so young. Frank watched these lessons with mixed emotions, pride at Ghost's natural ability, grief for the mother who should have been teaching these things. Worry about what came next, because every skill Ghost learned was another step toward the wild, toward the place he belonged, toward the inevitable separation that Frank was not ready to think about. But he had to think about it. The care guides were clear. Hand-raised large predators could not be released successfully without proper preparation. Ghost would need to know how to hunt real prey, how to avoid larger predators, how to establish territory, how to survive without human support. Frank had months to teach those lessons, and the responsibility felt crushing. He was not an expert. He was just a photographer with a broken heart, trying to keep a small creature alive. He started going through the research files more carefully, looking for information about Subject 7, about Ghost's mother and what she had known. The records were incomplete, corrupted by water damage and missing pages, but he pieced together enough. Subject 7 had been designated for import from a shrinking habitat in Mongolia 3 years ago. She had been part of the original group of 5 leopards released in this region. She had been one of only 2 females, which meant Ghost's father was either the other adult male who had vanished, or possibly a wild male that had wandered into the territory from who knew where. The files included GPS tracking data from Subject 7's collar. Frank pulled up the maps and traced her movements over 3 years. She had established a territory ranging from the high peaks down to the valley where the cabin sat. She had learned to hunt snowshoe hare, ptarmigan, the occasional mountain goat kid. She had figured out how to avoid the grizzly bears and the wolf pack that controlled the northern sector. She had survived alone through 3 Alaskan winters. And then she had successfully raised a cub at least to 8 weeks, which was itself miraculous for a first-time mother in unfamiliar territory. Frank studied those maps and movement patterns, memorizing details. This was Ghost's inheritance. This was the territory his mother had claimed and defended and ultimately died protecting. If Ghost was going to survive here, he would need to learn this landscape, these patterns, these lessons that Subject 7 never got the chance to teach him. Frank looked at Ghost, at the cub currently trying to fit his entire head into Frank's coffee mug, and felt the weight of impossible responsibility settle heavier. He was all Ghost had. No mother to teach him, no pride or pack or family structure. Just one broken man trying his best not to fail this creature the way he had failed at so many other important things in his life. Ghost pulled his head out of the mug, looked at Frank with absolute trust shining in those eyes, and chirped softly. The sound meant different things at different times, but Frank had learned to interpret the variations. This one meant contentment, safety, love, in whatever way a young predator could understand that concept. Frank reached out and scratched behind Ghost's ears, feeling the immediate rumble of purring startup. He said quietly, "I will do my best, little Ghost. I promise. I will teach you everything I can, and then I will let you be what you are meant to be, even if it destroys me to do it." Ghost bumped his head against Frank's hand, demanding more attention, oblivious to the promise being made or its cost. Outside, winter maintained its grip on the valley, but the light was changing day by day, minute by minute. Spring was coming, whether Frank was ready or not. The world beyond the cabin still existed, and eventually it would reclaim them both. But for now, there was only this moment. Frank and Ghost by the fire, learning each other's languages, building something neither of them had words for, but both desperately needed. It was not enough to heal all of Frank's broken places. It was not enough to replace what he had lost, but it was enough to make him want to see tomorrow, and the day after that, and the one after that. For a man who had stopped believing in tomorrows, That was everything. Spring arrived like a whisper that became a shout. The ice on the stream began to crack and flow, the sound of running water strange after months of frozen silence. The snow receded from the southern slopes in ragged patches, revealing brown earth and the first brave shoots of green pushing through layers of dead vegetation. The avalanche debris started to shift and settle, and Frank knew with sinking certainty that it was only a matter of weeks before the trails became passable again, before helicopters would come looking, before questions would be asked and decisions would need to be made. The decision he had made by the fire 3 months ago would become reality whether he was ready or not. Ghost had to return to the wild. The alternative was a zoo, a breeding program, a life in captivity that would slowly destroy everything that made the animal magnificent. Frank would not let that happen. He could not. Ghost was nearly 6 months old now, transformed from the half-frozen cub into something that took Frank's breath away every time he really looked at it. The oversized paws had been filled in by muscle. The baby fluff had been replaced by thick, luxurious adult coat marked with perfect rosettes. Ghost moved with the fluid, coiled grace that defined the species. Could leap 6 feet vertically from a standstill, could land from a 12-foot drop without making a sound. But physical capability was not the same as wilderness competence. Ghost could hunt rabbits and voles with deadly efficiency, could track prey across varied terrain, could survive freezing temperatures without Frank's help. But survival skills were not enough. Ghost needed to understand territory and dominance, needed to recognize the signs of larger predators and know when to fight and when to run. Ghost needed 100 small lessons that would make the difference between living and dying in true wilderness. Frank had 2 weeks, maybe 3, before rescue came. 2 weeks to teach Ghost everything a mother would have taught over 2 years. The impossibility of it kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling while Ghost slept, pressed against his side, purring in the darkness, trusting absolutely that Frank would figure everything out. They spent every daylight hour outside now. Frank pushed Ghost hard, creating scenarios, testing responses, building on the foundation they had established over the winter months. He dragged deer carcasses to different locations and made Ghost track them by scent alone, covering his eyes, forcing him to rely on smell and hearing. He identified bear marks on trees, grisly claw scars 6 feet up the trunk, and made Ghost understand the smell of danger, the warning that said another predator had claimed this territory. He showed Ghost how to find water under ice, how to recognize the hollow sound that meant danger, how to test before stepping. He taught Ghost about caching food, about digging deep enough to protect meat from scavengers, about marking the location to find it again weeks later. He exposed Ghost to as many situations as he could create, building a mental library of experiences to draw from when Frank was no longer there to guide him. Ghost learned with frightening speed, those pale eyes absorbing everything, that sharp predator mind processing patterns and solutions. Frank watched the animal master skills in days that should have taken months, and he felt both pride and grief with equal intensity. Every success brought Ghost closer to independence. Every lesson was another step toward the inevitable goodbye. Every perfect stalk or successful hunt was proof that Ghost would survive without him, which was exactly what Frank wanted and exactly what was going to destroy him when the moment arrived. The nights remained hard. Ghost still slept pressed against Frank, still purred like distant thunder, still sought comfort in proximity and touch. In the darkness, Frank would stroke the thick fur and memorize the feeling, the warmth, the weight, the simple, uncomplicated trust. The pure love that asked nothing except presence. He talked to Ghost during those nights, explaining what was coming. The animal could not understand the words, but Frank needed to say them anyway. He needed to speak the truth out loud so it would not shatter him completely when the moment arrived. On the 15th of March, Frank took Ghost to a remote valley 3 miles from the cabin. It was good territory. Steep enough to discourage casual human access, high enough that grizzlies rarely ventured up this far, with southern exposure that meant earlier thaw and more abundant prey. Rich meadows in summer, rock formations providing shelter in winter, a year-round stream that never fully froze. No signs of other large cats, which meant Ghost could establish dominance without immediate conflict from established adults. Frank had scouted this valley weeks before, making the decision with his head, even as his heart screamed against it. This would be Ghost's territory. This would be home. They spent 2 days there together. Frank showed Ghost the boundaries, the natural markers that defined the space. He pointed out the best ambush points, the game trails where prey moved predictably, the hidden approaches to the stream where animals came to drink. He found caves that could serve as shelter during storms, tested them for signs of bear or wolverine, declared them safe for Ghost to claim. Ghost explored with increasing confidence, moving through the space like he owned it already, claiming the territory with scent markers, climbing the high rocks to survey the domain from above. Frank photographed everything, capturing images he knew he would study for the rest of his life. Ghost silhouetted against the setting sun on a ridge. Ghost investigating a marmot den. Ghost sprawled on a warm rock, soaking up spring sunshine with absolute contentment. On the second evening, as the sun painted the valley gold and pink, Frank made his decision. It was time. Waiting longer would not make it easier. It would only make it harder for both of them. He called Ghost over using the whistle he had taught the cub months ago. Ghost came immediately, as he always did, and Frank knelt in the snow and held the animal's face between his hands. Those blue-gray eyes stared into his with absolute trust, no understanding of what was about to happen. Frank said, his voice cracking, "You do not need me anymore, Ghost. You are ready. You are strong and smart and wild. Everything you need to survive, you have inside you already. This is your territory now. This is where you belong." Ghost chirped, confused by the emotion in Frank's voice, by the tears streaming down the human's face. Frank continued, "I love you. I need you to know that. You saved my life, little Ghost. You gave me a reason to keep breathing when I had forgotten why that mattered. But I cannot keep you. Keeping you would be selfish. You are meant for this." He gestured at the vast wilderness surrounding them, not for a cabin, not for a human's fear of being alone again. He pulled Ghost close, buried his face in the thick fur that smelled of snow and wild places and something uniquely Ghost, and let himself cry. Truly cry, not trying to hide it or control it, just releasing the grief of what he was about to lose. Ghost tolerated the embrace with patience, purring, not understanding but offering comfort anyway in the only way he knew. Finally, Frank pulled back. He stood up, shouldered his pack, and began walking toward the trail that would take him back to the cabin. He did not look behind him. If he looked, if he saw Ghost's confusion, he would not be able to leave. He made it 200 yards before he heard the footsteps following. Soft paws on snow, distinctive pattern, unmistakable. Frank stopped and turned around. Ghost sat in the snow 30 feet back, watching him, head tilted in question. Frank said firmly, using the command voice he had developed over months, "No, stay." Ghost chirped, took a step forward. Frank's heart cracked down the middle. He turned and kept walking faster now, trying to create distance. The footsteps followed. He could hear Ghost behind him, matching his pace, refusing to be left behind. Frank tried twice more, creating distance, issuing commands. Ghost had never been trained to obey because Frank had never wanted to train him for this. Each time the Leopard followed. Each time, Frank felt his resolve crumbling. By the time the cabin came into view, he was barely holding himself together. That night, Ghost slept pressed against Frank's side, as always, purring in the darkness, completely unaware that his human was lying awake with tears soaking the pillow. In the morning, Frank would try again. He would keep trying until Ghost stayed. It took 4 more attempts over the next 5 days. Each time, Frank took Ghost to the valley. Each time, they spent hours there. Each time, Frank left, and Ghost followed him home. But on the 4th attempt, something shifted. Frank saw it in Ghost's body language. A new confidence, a sense of ownership over the territory. Ghost had been returning to the valley between Frank's visits, Frank realized, establishing routines, hunting there, making it home. Frank left as he had before, fighting every instinct to turn around, to call Ghost back, to take just one more day together. He walked the trail with tears blurring his vision, listening for the sound of footsteps that would mean Ghost was following. Silence. He stopped after 10 minutes, listening hard. No movement, no chirping, no Ghost. Frank turned around slowly, his heart in his throat. The valley was visible in the distance, and on a high rock formation backlit by the setting sun, a pale shape sat watching. Ghost. Still there, choosing to stay. Frank raised one hand in farewell, fingers trembling. The shape on the rock remained motionless. Frank stood there for a long moment, memorizing the sight. Ghost silhouetted against the sky, wild and free, and exactly where he belonged. Then Frank turned and walked toward the cabin, and this time, he walked alone. That night, the bed felt impossibly empty. The silence was crushing. Frank lay there listening to nothing, feeling the absence like a physical wound, and whispered into the darkness, "Be safe, Ghost. Please be safe." The rescue helicopter came 4 days later. Frank heard it before he saw it, the rhythmic chop of rotors echoing off the mountains. He stood outside the cabin watching it approach and felt nothing. The rangers landed, checked his health, asked questions about the winter. Had he seen any snow leopards? No, Frank lied smoothly. He had not. The female designated Subject 7 must have died in the avalanche, he said. He had found no trace of her or her cub. The project was over. He was ready to go home. They flew him to Anchorage. From there, he took a commercial flight to Montana. He returned to his house, to his photography equipment, to his life. But nothing fit anymore. The spaces were the same, but Frank had changed. He looked at his walls covered with wildlife photographs and saw only frozen moments, life trapped in frames. He wanted to see real life, wild life, free life. He sold the house within a month, bought a truck and a camper. He equipped himself for long-term wilderness living. He was 61 years old, and he had finally figured out how to live instead of just existing. He became a nomadic photographer, following animal migrations, documenting endangered species, sleeping under stars. He worked when he needed money, wandered when he did not. He photographed wolves in Yellowstone, bears in Alaska, bighorn sheep in Colorado. He was good at his work again, better than he had been before, because he understood now what he was trying to capture, not just images. Connection. The thing that existed between all living creatures when fear was set aside and trust was offered. He never went back to that valley in Alaska. He told himself it was about giving Ghost space, about not interfering with the animal's wild life. But the truth was simpler and more painful. He was afraid. Afraid Ghost would not remember him. Afraid Ghost would remember him and feel abandoned. Afraid of what it would do to his carefully rebuilt heart to see Ghost and have to leave again. 5 years passed. Frank turned 66. His heart started giving him trouble. Small warnings at first, irregular rhythms, fatigue, a feeling like his chest was too tight, like something was squeezing. His doctor prescribed medication and told him to slow down, to avoid strenuous activity, to consider settling somewhere instead of living out of a truck. Frank ignored the advice. He had spent too many years not living to waste whatever time remained being careful. He kept photographing, kept moving, kept trying to capture wildness through his lens. He was in the Canadian Rockies in late October, tracking a wolf pack when it happened. The chest pain hit him like a sledgehammer, like someone had reached inside and grabbed his heart and twisted. Frank stumbled, gasped, felt his legs give out. He collapsed in the snow on a remote trail, miles from the nearest road. His radio was in his pack. His pack was 10 feet away, which might as well have been a mile. He lay there, looking up at the sky, watching it darken at the edges. His last coherent thought was that this was not a bad way to go. Outside. Free. Surrounded by wilderness. Margaret would have approved. Ghost would have understood. Then he heard it. A sound that made no sense. A low, rumbling call. Not a wolf, not a bear. Something else, something impossible. Something that reached into Frank's fading consciousness and grabbed hold with claws made of memory and hope. He tried to turn his head, but the darkness was closing in too fast. He felt, rather than saw, a presence nearby. Large, warm, smelling of snow and wild places, and something so familiar it made his dying heart ache with recognition. The darkness took him completely. He woke in a hospital room with harsh fluorescent lights and the beeping of monitors. A ranger was sitting in a chair beside the bed reading a magazine. The man looked up when Frank stirred, relief washing across his face. The ranger said, "Mr. Mercer, welcome back. You had us worried there for a while." Frank's throat was dry, scratchy. He managed, "How?" The ranger leaned forward, and Frank could see the man was struggling with something, confusion and wonder competing in his expression. "That is the interesting part, and I am not entirely sure you're going to believe me. We got a call from a hiker who spotted what he thought was a snow leopard acting strangely near the trail where you collapsed. He said the animal was pacing back and forth, making sounds like it was trying to get attention. We figured he was mistaken, obviously. Snow leopards do not live in the Canadian Rockies, but we sent a team anyway because the location was so remote and we figured we should check on any hikers in that area." Frank's heart monitor started beeping faster. The ranger continued, "When we got there, we found you unconscious. But here is the strange part. The part I still do not quite understand. There were tracks, big cat tracks, circling around your position, over and over and over, like the animal had been pacing for hours. The tracks led back to the main trail, then to a logging road, like the cat was trying to show us the way in, like it was trying to lead us to you." Frank could not breathe. The ranger kept talking, pulling out his phone. "One of our guys got some photos before the animal disappeared into the forest. He sent them to wildlife services, and they said it was impossible, but the markings match. A snow leopard, male, young adult. They think it might be from that failed reintroduction project from years back in Alaska. We thought they were all dead or captured, but apparently at least one survived. Hell of a thing. It is like the animal was trying to save you." The ranger showed Frank a blurry photo on his phone, a pale shape in the distance, partially obscured by trees. But Frank would have recognized that pattern of rosettes anywhere. Would have known those eyes even from a grainy, out-of-focus image. Would have recognized the slight crook in the tail where Ghost had broken it as a cub, climbing too high in a tree and falling before Frank could catch him. Frank stared at the image and felt something break open in his chest. Not grief this time. Something else, something that felt like grace, like forgiveness, like a gift he had never expected to receive. The ranger, misunderstanding his expression, said quickly, "The doctors say you are going to be okay. We found you in time. You need surgery, a pacemaker probably, but you will recover. You got very, very lucky, Mr. Mercer." Frank whispered, "Ghost." The ranger frowned. "What?" Frank closed his eyes, tears leaking from the corners. "His name is Ghost. 3 months later, After surgery and recovery and strict orders to take it easier, Frank returned to the Canadian Rockies. Not to the place where he had collapsed, but to a different location. A place his research suggested was within the range of a young male snow leopard that had been spotted occasionally over the past few years. Sightings were rare, but they existed. A ghost moving through the mountains, surviving against all odds. Frank parked his truck at a trailhead, loaded his pack carefully, and hiked into the wilderness. He was moving slowly, listening to the rebuilt machinery of his heart, but he was moving. He had come back. He had to come back. He found a clearing he recognized from the ranger's rescue report. He set down his pack, pulled out a fresh rabbit he had bought from a local hunter, and placed it on a flat rock. An offering, an apology, a thank you, a way of saying, "I remember. I never forgot. You saved me twice." He sat down in the snow and waited. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Frank did not move. He was not sure what he was waiting for. A miracle, closure, forgiveness for leaving, proof that Ghost had not just survived, but had thrived. As the sun touched the horizon, Frank saw movement at the tree line. A large shape, pale as moonlight, stepping carefully from the shadows. Frank's breath caught and held. Ghost emerged slowly, cautiously, head low in a posture that was all wild predator. The leopard had grown massive, easily 130 pounds of pure muscle and wild grace. The coat was perfect, thick for winter, marked with rosettes so distinctive Frank could have picked Ghost out from 1,000 photographs. But it was the eyes that proved it. Blue-gray, intelligent, knowing. They looked at each other across 50 yards of snow. Frank did not move, did not call out, did not try to approach. This was Ghost's choice to make. This had always been Ghost's choice. The leopard studied him for a long moment, and Frank saw recognition flicker in those eyes, saw memory, saw the small cub pressed against his chest, trusting absolutely, saw every moment they had shared in that isolated cabin through a winter that had changed everything. Ghost walked to the rock, picked up the rabbit in jaws that could crush bone, and carried it to a spot 30 yards from Frank. The leopard lay down in the snow, the rabbit between his paws, and began to eat. Slowly, keeping Frank in sight the whole time, not afraid, not trusting exactly, something else, something that acknowledged their shared history while maintaining the distance that had to exist between wild creature and human. Frank felt tears streaming down his face. He whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for being free. Thank you for remembering." Ghost finished eating, stood, and looked at Frank one last time. Those eyes met his with something that might have been gratitude, or recognition, or simply acknowledgement that they had once meant something essential to each other. Then the leopard turned and walked back into the trees, dissolving into shadows like smoke, like a spirit returning to the mountains where it belonged. A ghost going home. Frank sat in the clearing until the stars came out, until the temperature dropped and the cold started seeping through his clothes. He thought about Margaret. He thought about Emma, who he had called last week for the first time in years, who had cried on the phone and said she missed him and wanted to try again. He thought about the letter he had written, the ending he had almost chosen, the darkness that had nearly consumed him. He thought about a tiny, frozen cub pressed against his chest, a heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird. He thought about how saving Ghost had saved him, how being needed had given him a reason to keep breathing when he had run out of reasons. How letting Ghost go had taught him that love was not possession, that the deepest care meant giving freedom, even when it destroyed you to do it. Frank stood up slowly, feeling the pull of new scars on his chest where they had opened him up and fixed his broken heart. He shouldered his pack and began the walk back to his truck. Behind him, somewhere in the vast wilderness, a snow leopard moved through the darkness, free, wild, alive, exactly as it should be. And Frank Mercer, who had learned to survive the longest winter of his life with help from the most unexpected source, smiled at the stars and walked toward whatever came next. The ending was not what he had planned 5 years ago. It was infinitely, impossibly better. He had lost everything and found it again in a form he never expected. He had learned that purpose could arrive in the shape of a dying cub, that healing could come from being needed, that love sometimes meant letting go, that grace could arrive on 4 paws in the middle of nowhere and save you twice. He looked back one last time at the clearing, at the place where he and Ghost had shared their final moment of recognition. The snow was already beginning to cover the tracks, erasing evidence of what had happened there. Frank whispered to the wilderness, "Be well, Ghost. Live long. Be free." Then he turned toward the trail and the truck and the life that waited beyond this moment. A life that now had Emma in it again, had connection in it, had purpose beyond just capturing images. A life that finally felt worth living instead of just surviving. The mountains stood silent and ancient around him, holding their secrets close. Somewhere in those peaks, a pale ghost moved through the night, and Frank carried that knowledge like a blessing. They had saved each other. They had loved each other in the ways they could, and they had both let go at exactly the right moment, which was perhaps the greatest gift of all. He walked on, his repaired heart beating steadily, and did not look back again.